Hello, my name's Bill Mullen. I'm a self-employed professional engineer doing business as river hydraulics, and I'm located in Newburyport, Massachusetts. I'd like to welcome you to this technical presentation. It's designed primarily for engineers and other technical people about one of the new capabilities of HEC RAS, the ability to model unsteady flows in 2 dimensions. I'm also going to touch upon a couple of the pieces of software that I used to develop HEC RAS model inputs. I'm going to use the tidally influenced Little River, which flows through Newburyport and Newbury, Mass, as an example. The advantages of 2D flood modeling. It takes advantage of the availability of digital elevation models. Digital elevation models are developed using LiDAR technologies and are available for many areas of the country. Accuracy is going to vary with the source of the DEM. This typically results in more accurate flood modeling. And we will be modeling unsteady flows, that is, flows that vary throughout a flood event. And this isn't just a snapshot of what happens at the peak of the flood. And probably the biggest advantage of 2D flood flow modeling is it can model complex runoff and tide and surge scenarios. Basically, you can show what is happening with water flowing downstream, as it typically is. However, sometimes it's flowing upstream, such as when a tide or a surge is coming in, flowing even sideways, and also into and out of temporary storage behind embankments or wetlands. Some of the features of HEC RAS are the 2D flow modeling. You can seamlessly combine LiDAR terrain data with surveyed channel bathymetry. LiDAR does not pick up what is underwater, so a channel bathymetry must be added in. And it is actually done within RAS Mapper, which is a part of HEC RAS. HEC RAS does automated floodplain delineation on the map of choice. Typically, engineers like aerial or topographic maps. And HEC RAS is certainly well tested. It is the gold standard. I chose to model the Little River using 2D flood modeling because Newburyport's business and industrial park and its 60 or so businesses is significantly impacted by flooding of the Little River. And I'm hoping that this 2D model will be used to evaluate the changes associated with proposed solutions to flooding, such as if you're going to enlarge culverts or raise road embankments. The tidally influenced Little River is tributary to the Parker River. The Parker River flows through Plum Island Sound and into Ipswich Bay and then into the Atlantic Ocean. Drainage area of the Little River Basin is 10.9 square miles. Now, we don't have any stream flow measuring gauges on the Little River, so hydrology is going to have to be developed another way. I'm going to do it using HEC-HMS, that stands for Hydrologic Modeling Software, and it is rainfall-runoff modeling program. The inputs into HMS include drainage area, runoff curve number, and time of concentration, and you do that for each sub-basin that you're modeling, and also precipitation and its timing. I used Quantum GIS and very powerful GRAS GIS software to perform automated subbasin delineation using the digital elevation model brought into it. The digital elevation model for the Little River work that I used was the USGS 2011 LiDAR for the Northeast. It has great vertical accuracy, that's of 15 centimeters, which is about 6 inches, and a horizontal resolution of 1 meter. This level of accuracy and detail is very suitable for flood modeling work. Now, I also use GIS to identify runoff flow pathways and extract river networks on an automated basis. This is far preferable to doing it by hand. Now, shown in red are the time of concentration flow pathways for the various subbasins that we used in HEC-HMS. The time of concentration determinations was done using the NRCS upland method, which breaks down flow paths into 3 portions, that being sheet flow, shallow concentrated flow, and then channel flow. Time of concentration must be calculated in order to do rainfall runoff modeling using the unit hydrograph method of transforming runoff into stream flows. GIS was definitely helpful in this case. It helped me get accurate flow path lengths and elevations at the beginning and end points of the 3 types of reaches for each of the subbasins. One of the many map layers brought into GIS was hydrologic soil groups. These were obtained from maps published by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they're published for Essex County. A fair amount of processing is needed to get these maps into this colorful format and showing only what is needed. But something like this is absolutely needed in order to have HMS use the SES curve number loss method. Another map layer brought into GIS was data on land use, and this came from NOAA's Coastal Change Analysis Program, also known as CCAP. The next step in the process was getting the GIS software to overlay the maps of subbasin boundaries, which I showed a couple slides ago, with hydrologic soil groups, shown on the previous slide, with this one. Overlaying these maps results in a single map with thousands of tiny polygons of various parameters, and the GIS software is able to come up with the acreages of each of these tiny polygon areas. As you might imagine, it'd otherwise be impossible to ascertain the acreage of, say, low-intensity developed land with hydrologic soil group C within Little River Subbasin X. This is, however, a very necessary step in developing a single runoff curve number for each subbasin. Thank you, GIS. Next step was to come up with a large historic rainfall event to be modeled in HMS and to be later used in the calibration of the HEC RAS hydraulic model. Now, I'm not going to discuss the 100-year rainfall model in this presentation due to time concerns. It basically involves just coming up with a rainfall total amount and a rainfall distribution. And anyway, let me get back to the historic rainfall event. The largest flood in the past couple of decades in this area was the so-called Mother's Day flood of May 2006, a time in which the area received about a foot of rain over a 5-day period, with most of it coming on May 13th and 14th. And this is a photo of associated flooding along the Little River at Parker Street in Newburyport, near the Malcolm Hoyt Drive entrance to the city's business park. Here's a snapshot from the Northeast River Forecast Center's website, as shown in the USGS report entitled Flood of May 2006 in New Hampshire. It shows that the storm covered a large geographic area, including northeast Massachusetts. Hourly precipitation was available for this event at a precipitation gauge in nearby Beverly, Massachusetts. Now, the primary inputs to the HMS model were subbasin size, runoff curve number, and time of concentration for each subbasin, and as well as rainfall and its temporal distribution. But this slide is showing HMS model output for one of the Little River's subbasins for the 4 biggest rainfall days that occurred during the Mother's Day event. The green line in the top part of the slide shows rainfall loss into soil, captured by tree cover, etc. And the red line is the portion of the precipitation that runs off, also known as precipitation excess. The blue line at the bottom is the hydrograph output from HMS using an assumed peak rate factor of 484 that was determined prior to any calibration in HEC RAS. Now, this hydrograph is for one subbasin, but HMS provided hydrographs for 18 subbasins that I used in my analysis. Now, I did end up combining a few of the subbasins after making the determination that 18 subbasins originally delineated was probably a bit of overkill. And I did this combining of flow hydrographs using an Excel spreadsheet. And I reduced it to the 10 subbasins shown on this slide. Now that I've determined flow hydrographs for each of the Little River's subbasins for the Mother's Day event, it's time to start describing the HEC RAS hydraulic model that I set up for the hydraulic analysis of the Little River. I did this modeling it as one single 2D flow area. I used the digital elevation model with a vertical accuracy of 5.9 inches and a 1 meter horizontal resolution. I selected a cell size of 250 feet by 250 feet. Now, a cell size of that dimension is fine when the water surface slope is small, as in the case of the floodplain here. However, I did use much smaller cell sizes along the embankments. There were nearly 6,000 cells total in this within the single 2D flow area. Each cell and cell face has its own highly detailed hydraulic rating curve. Now, running this model this way took about a half an hour on my laptop computer using the 10-second computation step, and I ran it over 7 days, so that's why it took that time. And just so you know, routing of flows is done from cell to cell. Here are the boundaries of the 2D flow area that I set up. You can see the cells in it, and you can also see where I did the very small cells along road embankments. Here's what the underlying digital elevation map looks like when you give it gray hillside shading. And I have some vertical exaggeration that I gave it as well. It shows a basin with not particularly hilly topography, especially within the 2D flow area. The elevations in this basin varied from about 150 feet above NAVD 88 to about 0, which is about sea level. The DEM used was a bare earth DEM with buildings and tree cover removed. Now, the digital elevation model does not pick up anything underwater, so there was some cross sections from a previous field survey of another engineering firm that were available, and I was able to merge the underwater part with the digital elevation model, and that was done in HEC RAS Mapper. This slide will give you a good idea of the grade accuracy of the digital elevation model transect. That's the red line shown compared to what was obtained during the field survey conducted by another firm as part of its 2011 study of Little River flooding. The cross section that I've chosen to look at is upstream of Parker Street, and this cross section is oriented looking downstream. The overlay of the two transects was done within RAS Mapper. Now, culverts and bridge openings were modeled within the 2D flow area. As I just stated, channel bathymetry was merged with the overbank terrain from the DEM. I had 10 stream inputs into the 2D flow area and 1 tidal input at the downstream end. And also part of the model is Manning's N roughness coefficients for all cells. This shows where I input flows into the 2D flow area, the 10 areas, and the 1 tidal input area. And the tidal stages for the Mother's Day storm were obtained directly from Boston Harbor. I did not do any kind of manipulation to convert it to Newburyport. And here's the Manning's N for the 2D flow model. That came from the CCAP data as well. Now, I have done some calibration to date, and to date it's involved adjustments made to the peak rate factor used in the unit hydrograph transformation method. I did it for the Mother's Day storm of 2006, and that's an event that I have a few high water marks at some of the road crossings, and that will give me a good indication of how accurate the model is. I found the model produced very reasonable results. It was always within a half a foot of that actually observed during the event. So I consider this to be well calibrated at this point and produces realistic and reasonable results. You could do minor improvements to the model by adding culverts under driveways and things like that, but it is probably unnecessary given that we're looking at major flood events. All right, now for the good stuff. I'm going to show you HEC RAS output. This is going to be for the Mother's Day storm of 2006. This is after some calibration, and this is at Parker Street, which is right here. Let me start the simulation. Very neat. I'll speed it up a little bit in time. Here we go. All right. Now I'll let it run a little bit, and you can see where water is overtopping Parker Street. This is indeed where it really happened. Okay, let me stop that and show you particle tracing, another neat feature. What that shows is where water is going through the culverts under Parker Street and where it's being overtopped. And another neat feature here is I can get the water surface elevation over time at any given point. Let me get it, say, somewhere upstream of the culvert here. And there we go. Now, similar to what I did to show an animation of water surface elevations and flood boundaries, HEC RAS can also do the same thing for flood depths and flood water velocities. Next steps, you run HEC RAS for whatever kind of scenario you can envision. 100-year rainfall events, various tide and storm surge events, and any number of combination of events. Now, probably the very most important use of HEC RAS is going to be evaluating the flood impacts associated with proposed flood mitigating measures, such as if you're going to change culvert sizes and bridge openings, you cannot simply transfer one problem from one area to another and generally get a permit for what you're looking for. You could look at changes in embankment heights, and perhaps you could get even more creative and add flap gates that maybe keep the tide out. Now, HEC RAS can also be used to assess sea level rise and storm surge, as well as climate change, rainfall amounts, and temporal patterns. That concludes this presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it, maybe learned something. And I'd like to thank you for watching, and please be sure to give it a thumbs up and share it if you enjoyed it. Thank you.